Thank you. And my name is Hideki Garren. I'm a neurologist from Hoffman Roche. And first of all, thank you to EFPIA for organizing uh, this, this group presentation, if you will. They really did a nice job of making us all come to the table and have a common presentation. And also thank you to EMEA for allowing us to be here. And particularly thank you for staying open, even despite the US government shutdown. So, just reopened, okay. So following on Mike's presentation, you'll hear a common theme in my presentation as well as in my colleagues, I believe, and that is of treating early with high efficacy drugs before patients get disability, before they get permanent disability. So that's a common theme you'll hear. And so what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to touch just a little bit because Mike did a really nice job of laying the landscape for this topic. But I'll touch a little bit on disease progression and again, the importance of early intervention. We chose to focus in this presentation on the language within the draft guidelines themselves. So I'm going to quote the draft guideline. And really, bottom line is none of us really like it, but I'm going to try to convince you why, and sort of an alternative, and that is our recommendation. That is a parallel approach. And then finally, it's really focusing on denying and delaying access to high efficacy medications for these patients before they get accumulating disability. So again, just touching a little bit on the background, the graphic at the bottom you've seen in various forms throughout the day, so I won't spend a lot of time on it, except to point out that this is a graph of disability over time. The red bars obviously represent relapses over time, and then the blue line indicates accumulating disability. And that's an important blue line. This is disability. You can measure it by EDSS or other means, but it's accumulating disability that can eventually evolve to permanent disability. Also, equally important is the green line, the clinical threshold. So if you look below that green line, there's quite a lot of relapses, quite a lot of disease progression occurring way to the left. So in asymptomatic patients, this is occurring even before you can make that diagnosis, even before there's symptoms present. So again, the theme is to try to get drugs, try to get patients to stay to the far left as possible before they progress, before they get permanent disability. And so that really gets back to the theme of importance of early intervention. So we want to try to get high efficacy drugs to these patients to the far left as possible, minimize nerve damage, minimize the accumulation of lesions. And lesions, this disease is easier to treat earlier than later on. So let me quote the draft guideline as they stand right now. And this is graphically represented by the boxes at the top. So the guideline says for compounds that have a profound effect on the immune system, you should first do the orange box. So that is do the trial on patients that have insufficient response or anticipated rapid progression. And if there's no concern raised by safety, then move to the broader population in the sequential order, step 1, step 2. So we chose to represent that graphically, again, using the same graphic by the same orange and blue boxes. So again, the first step would be in patients that are unresponsive or have anticipated progression disease. So in other words, later MS patients, followed by a second step, the blue box, in earlier MS patients. Now there's a couple problems presented with the orange box. There really are no uniform criteria to define insufficient response. Gordon Francis from Novartis later on is going to talk about more detail what the difficulties are. But for example, do you define it clinically? Do you define it by MRI? Do you define it by length of treatment and so on? And then secondly, the second definition of an anticipated rapid progression disease. Again, you can come up with a definition, but again, there's no uniform criteria. Now, what are the consequences of this two-step approach? One is you may never get to the second step. So again, this gets to the lost opportunity for potentially high efficacy drugs to never be tested in these early MS patients. And these patients, therefore, may be denied access to these high efficacy drugs. You may have a drug that actually is much more effective in early MS. So if you test in the first step, you may never get there to the second step. So that's the consequence of this two-step approach. Finally, there could be a delay in getting this to patients. So this is graphically represented in a typical development timeline at the top, the two-step approach. So again, the orange box followed by the blue box. And this will lead to typically approval as shown at the green diamond around year 10 in this example. However, we are going to recommend a parallel approach where you do parallel trials in the appropriate population, and that will get drugs to patients 3 to 5 years earlier, typically. Now, when conducting these trials, there are appropriate measures that we normally take to ensure safety. And these are detailed here. Just to point out a couple of them, we almost always use a data monitoring committee that can look at data, blinded or unblinded, that can intervene. They can stop a trial. They can cause you to change how the trial is conducted. There are other measures such as pre-specified lab alerts or stopping rules and so on. And again, a topic that Mike touched on, there are post-marketing risk management plans put in place that can be put in place to again follow drug safety even after marketing. So these procedures allow us to monitor safety during the conduct of a trial and post-marketing. Finally, the guideline really focuses on immune drugs. Is it fair to pick on immune molecules? And our contention is probably not fair. And the way we've sort of teased that out is immune molecules may have an immune mechanism of action, and are they guilty before proven innocent? Our contention is you should look at the data instead. Does the data indicate that these molecules are not safe or not? And then the second way to tease that out is, are there effects on the immune system in terms of adverse events? Can a molecule have effects outside the immune system that are not focused on the immune system? And so in other words, we don't think it's fair to pick on immune molecules per se. So finally, a recommendation. We recommend a parallel approach and within the appropriate MS population. And this is graphically displayed by the two blue boxes. Within the parallel approach, you would incorporate the appropriate safety mitigation measures as I described. And the appropriate MS population is defined by the molecule by available clinical data. So again, the benefit-risk conclusions should be based on clinical data, not simply because it's an immune-mediated molecule. And this will lead to high-efficacy drugs that can be treated in patients earlier to, again, stop the progressions and stop permanent disability in these patients. This can lead to faster availability of these drugs to patients, and by our calculation, 3 to 5 years typically. And then my last slide, just to reiterate, we recommend a parallel approach for all compounds, regardless of the immune effect, in MS patients defined by the stage of disease and the available data. This prevents delay in patient access, allows investigation of the appropriate MS population, and really the bottom line, the most important one, is it supports development of medicines to prevent accumulation of disability in these patients. So I'll just end with slides showing all the industry contributors. Thank you.